There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another Friday Reads. I didn't do one last week. I was busy and out of town. Not so far out of town. I was at my parents' farm. Had a lovely weekend there. And there will be a special video that I filmed with my mother coming soon. I have lots of news. Maybe the first piece of business that I'm going to be very happy to tell you about is that I purchased a new microphone. It's not plugged in yet, so this is me just recording with the built-in mic of my iPad Pro. But what I got was, the brand name is Shure, S-H-U-R-E. It's a Motive MV51 large diaphragm condenser microphone. There it is. And I love it. Now, I have never had any significant issues with the quality of the built-in microphone for my iPad, so I don't think I'm going to bring it out very often. I think I'd like to use it for indoors. That's where the difference is really noticeable. I wanted a new mic to connect to my laptop for my Zoom chats because I noticed that the Blue Yeti that I've had for a decade is starting to wear out. So that's where I'm mainly going to use it, so that my Zoom chats will be enhanced. So I'm excited about that. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is, well, you know what? Let's stop talking about it and let you hear it. All right, so here now it's plugged in, and I think some of you are not going to notice an appreciable difference, and that's fine. I can hear a difference, but where the difference is really pronounced is indoors. I don't like filming in so many different places in my apartment because of the room echo, and this completely takes care of that. So I'm, of course, planning to film as many videos outside as I can while the weather cooperates, but once we get to wintertime again or a rainy day, I have so many more options of filming any old place in my apartment with this mic, and I bought a separate mic stand so that I can have it right up against my mouth. So yay! The last thing I'll say about the mic is, what sold me on it was it came with 3 different cords. One to plug into Lightning, so that's my iPhone, and USB-C, which is what my iPad Pro uses, and the standard USB plug-in for my laptop, so I can use it on any device I own. And I have not, it's the first mic I found that was that flexible. So I'm absolutely delighted, and I'd like to give a special shout out to Chris of the Book Cougars podcast, who recommended the brand. I don't think she knew about this particular model, but she uses a Shure mic, and based on that I did some digging, and now I have one. So thanks, Chris. Okay, lots of news. It's a nice, cool Friday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning. Cloudy, which I like, and there's no kids playing in the park yet, but that probably will change before I'm through here, and that's fine. It'll be interesting to see how this mic, which it's not built to have one of those soft foamy things as a protector, because it's kind of an odd shape, as you saw. Here it is again. And they certainly don't, the Shure company doesn't have one available. Maybe I can rig one together, but it'll be interesting to have some noise, children's screaming or whatever, to see how much it picks up. I told you several weeks ago, a few months ago, that my parents' dog, Katie, died very suddenly. She was only 6 years old, and Mom and Dad were really bereft because they had decided that they were at an age where they really couldn't get another dog. Well, they have changed their mind. So I'd like you to welcome Ricco to our family, and they just picked her up on, I think, Wednesday. Ricco, if you know anything about dogs, which I don't, you probably already can tell from the video that I'm playing right now, that Ricco is a Papillon puppy. He is, and I'm going to be, talk about pronouns, I'm going to have trouble switching pronouns. Ricco is a male dog. Mom and Dad have had female Sheltie Collies for more than a decade, so I'm going to trip up and say she, but it's a he, and Ricco is 6 months old. And they got him from a dog breeder down near Regina. It's a little bit older, so they don't have to do so much of that early training and all that stuff. But what happened was somebody wanted to buy Ricco and named him. And so then the trainer, but they didn't have the money up, all of it up front, so they put a deposit. I think they put a deposit. And the trainer held Ricco for months and started calling it Ricco. And then this people that wanted to buy it, they couldn't come up with the money, and so they had to withdraw. So Ricco became available at the age of 6 months and has been being called Ricco for 6 months. We're not 100% crazy about the name Ricco, but we'll get used to it. Anyway, Mom and Dad are excited, and the deal was that Kenji and I and Suzanne, my sister Suzanne and her family, that we would kind of share the care, and especially if anything happened to either one of my parents in terms of, not being able to look after it for a few days, a few weeks or whatever, that we would step up, and happy to do that. I'm not a pet person, but I already think Ricco is something special. And when Kenji gets here, he is going to ignore me and just play with Ricco all day long. I'm a little worried about that, but Ricco is a new member of the family. Okay, major tone change here. I don't think I'll be telling anybody who hasn't already heard directly this sad news, but Hannah of Hannah's Books, her lovely husband, David Myers, died a few days ago. And if you have been following her channel, and I don't know why you wouldn't have been following Hannah's Books, it's one of the best booktube channels out there. You know all about it. So I just want to give Hannah a big gay hug through this shout out. Be thinking about you in the coming days and weeks. All right, I have 2 weeks of highlights. And then when you come back from that, I've got some major news about formatting changes to my Friday reads. Here's the 2 weeks in review. I've got some books that I've been dying to read forever. Here is a Czechoslovakian novel. Mendelssohn is on the Roof by Jiří Weil. I believe it's pronounced Weil, and translated from the Czech by Marie Wynn. The title is what sucked me into it and made me track it down. During the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, an SS officer is ordered to remove the statue of the Jewish composer Mendelssohn, and plot ensues.
But he becomes involved in the entire novel through the end, but he might be considered the main character to some readers, which his story is certainly entertaining, and he felt authentic to me as well as a reader. But I read it for the sisterly bond aspect and what happens with them.
And it's the sign of a layered, full-bodied novel where you get to choose who you think the main character is. How fabulous. I have a very strong memory of this book and this exact edition because in 1993 I was in Toronto as a grad student, just massively depressed by how much I hated grad school in English literature. It was just horrible. All this literary critical bullshit, theory, post-structuralist nonsense. I was just... And one day I had about 3 essays I had to write, and I just rebelled, and I walked down the street to the This Ain't the Rosedale Library bookstore in the gay district of Toronto where I lived, and bought this and went to a cafe and started reading, because I hadn't read anything that wasn't on a course list for months, and I was starved for fiction. So this is a novel. Is it a novel? Yes, a novella, really. Rumi and the Red Handbag by Shauna LeMay. And Lindy loves this, and she basically put it in my hand and said, you should buy this. This is one that Lindy doesn't think I'm necessarily going to like, but I'm curious, so I grabbed it when it was up for grabs. And that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Everybody and their dog knows about this. I actually have a bite-sized book chat in the pipeline. She looks, but she doesn't climb down anymore. Doesn't slip on loose gravel and cascading sand, or, reaching the dry floor of the pit, kneel on pebbles to see the beetles scramble to their little houses under the stones. She could. She's not old, not yet 50, but she doesn't. Nevertheless, she remembers stones and beetles, and the lonely space below the wind. She feels for the buttonhole on her sweater, searches for a button to secure the garment more tightly against her chest. But the button isn't there. Hasn't been there for as long as she can remember. Wasn't there even when her mother was alive, a long, long time ago. Well, I quite love that. All right, so I have a couple of weeks to think about this, and I've come up with something. I don't know how long it will last, but I'm going to implement this change today and see how it goes. I've decided that it's really kind of silly for me to... I'd like telling you about the books I'm going to start in the coming week. So I'm not nixing that. That will still be one of the most enjoyable parts for me anyway as the creator. to tell you about the books I'm going to be starting. But I am going to radically change the way that I report back about starting those books, because inevitably, because I'm reading so many books, I'm lucky if I manage to read the first 10 pages of any of those books by the following Friday reads. And I don't think it's very interesting for me to say, well, I like the first 10 pages, or so I'm not going to check in on new books that I've started to read until I've read, say, like 40 pages, so that I can give you a better idea of what's going on with it and what I'm thinking about it. Because I like to check in early in a book, but 10 pages is too early, and that's inevitably all I've read by the Friday reads that comes next. So that's gone. So when it comes to the books I've started section, I might have to come up with a different name, because maybe the new name should be Books I've Made a Good Start On. Maybe that would be the new name for that section, instead of Books That I've Started, because very few of them are going to be books I've started last week. So, Books I've Gotten a Good Start On is the new section. I'm not sure about the name. Maybe you'll suggest a better one if you understand what I'm trying to say, because it's highly likely that I'm making no sense at all. But the books that I check in on early in my reading journey with them are going to be books that I've read at least 40 pages of. And I may shift that if it's like a short story collection and I've read one story. I think I feel kind of that it would be okay to check in on the one story, but maybe more likely the first two stories before you hear from me. So I think that's going to go better. I feel that it's quality control for my Friday reads. Probably very few of you give a rat's ass about any of this, but now you know. Okay, the last 2 weeks have been big bailing, but probably if you break it down over 2 weeks, I'm bailing at the same rate, but because I've been gone for 2 weeks, it's massive. I have 5 bails to tell you about. I've only finished one book, and I'm going to check in on books that I've made a good start with, and I'm going to check in on 4 of those books today, as well as telling you what I'm going to start. I was really disappointed that I didn't get along with this at all and bailed. This memoir of a Cambodian lesbian and her mother, Ma and Me, by Putsata Reang, I should say Cambodian American writer and journalist. I disagree quite profoundly with the rave reviews this has gotten, because I bailed on it because I didn't think the author, and I'm not going to rant, but I'm not going to pull my punches because this is a much lauded book, so I want to contribute a less laudatory review to the mix. I thought that there was no insight. I thought that she's not a memoirist. I didn't feel that she ever really understood anything about her parents, and it was so glib, and I got really irritated by the superficiality of the portrait she painted of her parents. I enjoyed and was very interested in what they experienced, but I hated the way that she conveyed anything to do with who they were as people. I just thought it was really embarrassingly bad. So I can't remember how far I got, but maybe halfway through, and I gave up. Now, do check out all the glowing reviews, because, I am often a voice in the wilderness, but I thought this was really subpar. There's a few people in the park, but they're very quiet. I also bailed on the novel by Peter Cameron, Coral Glynn. That was another one that was assigned to me by Thomas of Hogglestock.com, formerly of the Reader's Podcast. Because I loved the first 6 or 7 pages when I did a vlog recently. But it was too gothic. There was nothing wrong with it. It's just gothic. Like, gothic is such a stupid tone in a book. Oh my God. Like, my thing with gothic shit is it's shitty because you don't have to really delve into character, because everything's kind of spooky and eerie. And that is, from my very unique, idiosyncratic, growly perspective, that is just lazy writing. Who cares about eerie shit if there's no character development? Like, I just thought these characters were so paper thin and just irritated the crap out of me. So that one's gone. Sorry, Tom. But I know Thomas doesn't watch my channel, but I think I'm in the doghouse when it comes to Thomas. I've got 2 left that he assigned me, and I'm hoping for better things. Oh, I didn't bring the book. I forgot to bring the book. But I also bailed on Big Swiss, and I can't remember the author, but here's the cover gif. Oh, Jen Beagin, I think. Jen Beagin. I thought it was very inventive. The structure was really interesting. The voice was interesting. It kind of held my interest, but by about halfway through, I realized I just didn't care. I just didn't care. It was too inventive by half. Lots of younger gay readers, or maybe not just gay readers, gay male readers. It's by a lesbian author. I haven't heard any lesbians weigh in on this book, but maybe I'm missing something. But I found out about it from a bite-sized book chat from a young, very articulate gay bookstagrammer. Can't remember his name right now. I'll put a link to that bite-sized chat in the show notes. And it was his book of the year. He expected it would be. Certainly it was the best book he'd read up to that point. Maybe I'm too old, but such a weird book that even the premise is hard to describe. But there's a lesbian living in a small city or a big town in New York somewhere, upstate New York. I don't know the geography of New York, but it's somewhere in New York. It's not New York City. It's a much smaller town or city. She's never really found a career. And so she's working as a transcriptionist for a sex therapist. And it's such a small place, the community, that she ends up, interacting with the people whose transcript she's transcribing. And she gets a crush on one of them, who she nicknames Big Swiss, which is a straight Swiss woman who has all kinds of issues. The sex therapist is a total dweeb. I didn't get a sense that he was like a predator on his clients. It wasn't that, but he was just really inappropriate with the things that he would say, and the inanity of his interjections and the questions he would ask added some humor to it, and that was fun to a certain degree. And then, of course, our hero, the protagonist, she ends up meeting Big Swiss and developing a connection with her. And the story goes from there. But by the time I got a ways into their connection, and of course the secret, she was keeping it a secret. She didn't let on to Big Swiss that she knew all about her stuff. And I just didn't care. Like, the connection was superficial, and I just lost interest in it. So I bailed. The other thing that didn't work for me, but I wasn't offended by, was that Big Swiss had some major sexual abuse, sexual assault issues. And I felt that the mishmash of tones about that was a little jarring for me personally. But mainly it was just that I didn't care what was happening. So I'm too old for Big Swiss. Maybe that's the way to button that discussion up. What do you think? I was planning to do a pseudo buddy read of this Caribbean novel from Trinidad with Nyambura in Nairobi. They are repeat guests on Bite-Sized Book Chats, and I adore them and discussed an innumerable number of ways we could collaborate in the future. And one of them was to do a pseudo buddy read, and we agreed very rapidly on this because it's gotten so much buzz. Hungry Ghosts by Kevin Jared Hosein. I think it's just come out this year. No, 2022. But Nyambura and I might be the only people on the planet who didn't love it. We both didn't really like it very much, and so we decided to bail. It's set in the 1940s, at the end of the American occupation, and also the end of the British colonialism. And my Trinidadian history is pretty much zero. So I didn't even realize it was set in the 1940s until right this moment. There is a farm, the Changer Farm. And at the opening of the novel, the head guy, he's really weird, Dalton, he leaves a weird note for his much younger wife, Marlee. It doesn't kind of explain anything, but kind of intimates that he might never be back. And there was something about the description of those two characters in particular that just left me cold from page 1. I just didn't find them interesting, and the ways in which Dalton, who I got halfway through this novel, and Dalton never made another appearance, but his young wife, she was bodacious, and she had a crush on one of the hired men, and it just seemed really cliched to me. The ways in which Dalton, who was off screen the whole time, but the way he was made to be weird, like he talked to his mother through a Buddha statue that he had built a temple. There's just stuff that none of it landed for me, and I don't know much about Nyambura's experience, but they readily agreed to bail. Much more successful was the characters that were lower class, Hans, Shweta, their son Krishna, and others. and they live in horrific poverty in the barracks, in a barracks, and their characters were, I thought, much more interesting, but I just couldn't really get on with these more upper class characters, and the deserted wife's machinations just were so uninteresting to me, so I bailed. Writing was fine. I think if you like plot-driven fiction and don't care so much about character development, although, as I say, the lower class characters were quite well done, you would probably, and most people do, really like this book. I didn't like it well enough to finish. My final bail was just about an hour ago. The last time you saw me, I told you I was going to start this novella from the library, and I'll be talking about it later, because I didn't start it because then I remembered, I have one more of the book spin books for June to read. So I started it instead, and I have now bailed on it. Booktube Spin that Rick McDonnell brought to Booktube is on hiatus, but it's going strong, or a version of it is going strong on Litzy. So I jumped into that in June, and now have bailed on both of the ones that got drawn. But, I'm working through my library, or my Kindle library in this case. So, the novel I bailed on is Saving Lucia by Anna Vaught. I think it was published a couple years ago. And it is a historical novel about an upper-class British woman who made an assassination attempt on Mussolini in the 1930s. It was, I think, the 1930s. It might have... When did he come to power? The late 1920s? It was early in his time. Britain was pretty friendly with Mussolini at the beginning, something I didn't know. Anyway, so she had some mental health issues, but also, too bad she didn't succeed. He was only very slightly wounded, I believe, kind of through his nose or something. And he was really upset that it was a woman who had almost killed him, but he was very lightly injured. And to preserve the good relations between his country and the UK, they just sent her back. And she was put into a mental institution. It's a famous one still running today. I've forgotten the name of it. Until she died as an old woman. She was a very young woman when this happened, and she was put there and left to rot for the rest of her life. And the other famous person who's in that same mental health institution is James Joyce's daughter, and I can't remember if that's Lucia or the other woman's Lucia. I never did get the name straight, because I don't care about characters' names, really. And that is based on a true story, too. She's the narrator, and at the point where I bailed, which is about 20% in, I hadn't really got too much of her story, but she was telling the other woman's story. And this is what I find with a lot of historical fiction. Like, the writing was good, it was quite literary, I had no problem with the writing. It was told in a really confusing way, and I just have to say that 9 times out of 10 with historical fiction, it's like, I would just rather read a non-fiction book about these people. I don't want to read a novel about these people, because I keep getting pulled out of the story. I keep Googling, did this happen? Is this really true? Or whatever. And just, it wasn't holding my interest. So that's gone. All right. Those are my bails. Oh, boy. So as I said, I finished one. I did it on audio, and I had the benefit of the ebook, which I dipped into now and again. But primarily I did it over about 10 days on audio. And this is a Syrian-Canadian queer novel, The Foghorn Echoes by Danny Ramadan, and I loved it. It wasn't a perfect novel, but a 5-star read for me is a novel that I loved and that moved me emotionally despite flaws, because if the flaws are big enough that I didn't love it, then it's a 4-star book. I did debate whether was this a 4-star and was this a 5-star, and I was deeply moved by the ending, so that is automatically a 5-star read. There's a tag going around about how you do your ranking, and I haven't schooled you all on my approach because I've talked about it on my channel so much. I don't think I need to do that tag, do you? Well, apparently I'm doing this tag right in the middle of my Friday reads. It is called the How Do We Rate Our Books tag, and it was created by Emily at Novell Novels. I was tagged by Roz of Scallydowning about the books. I know one of my patrons has asked me, so I am completely subjective. I don't believe there's no such thing as an objective review. That's nonsense. And subjectively, my ratings are based on loving, liking, being left cold, and not liking and hating. And that's the 5 stars. So if I loved it, it's 5 stars. If I only liked it, which is a pretty bad book in my estimation, it's 4 stars, and I'm bailing on more of those. Like, for example, this Anna Vaught book about the mental health institution would have been a 4-star read, so why bother? A 3-star book is a bad book. I didn't like it. 4-star book. Obviously, I misspoke. I meant to say a 2-star book is a book that I really didn't like, and a 1-star book is a book that I hated. And I mean, I know that's not the way Goodreads describes their ratings, but Goodreads is wrong, and so are all of you if you don't do the Sean, the Book Maniac emotional rating scale. You know, I'm totally kidding. There, I've just done that tag that's going around. I wish that there was a 10-point scale because, you know, the difference between a book that I loved and a book that I really, really loved, or that was a transformative read that was one of the best books I've ever read, if I could do it with a 10-point rating, then there would be a lot more differentiation at the top end. But no, my 5-star reads are books I love. They may have been transformative, they may be full of flaws that didn't bother me too much. They may be some of the best books I've ever read. Those are all 5-star reads for me. The Foghorn Echoes by Danny Ramadan. It's the first book I've read by him. He is a queer Syrian-Canadian writer. I think this is at least his second, but maybe he's written more than one other book before. And I thought it was really good. I thought it was excellent in many ways, and it was moving. It's about 2 gay Syrian guys. Okay, there's a crow. Let's see how much the crow picks up. This reminds me of making Friday Reads in Tokyo. There's often crows. It drove me nuts until most of you said that you didn't mind the crows. The opening is really dramatic, and it involves the first kiss between these boys. Their names are Hussam and Wasim. And Hussam's father seeing them making out, and then there's a tragedy, which I won't spoil, even though it's early in the book, that affects these characters and the story for the rest of the novel. It's really powerful. And if it wasn't happening in Syria, I probably would have thought it was overly dramatic, but in that culture, and again, what I know of that culture, what I think I know of that culture, I had to think about it for a few days, but know that it was appropriately dramatic in terms of the murderous homophobia that overtook Hussam's father when he saw his son kissing the neighbor boy. In alternating chapters, 2 different audio narrators, one of whom was the author, Danny Ramadan, but in 2 first-person accounts, we follow these characters, and in the present of the novel, Hussam has recently come to Vancouver as a gay refugee from Syria, from war-torn Syria, and he is creating a new life for himself with his boyfriend who sponsored him. They met online when Hussam was in the refugee camp in Turkey, and that's how he got to Canada. The relationship they have is not all that great. And Wasim is back in Syria, and he is all alone in war-torn Syria, Damascus. We find out about what happened to him and his family, and he did get married, but they're all gone out of his life, and he is very vulnerable and alone, and it's a very dangerous situation. And he breaks into a house that he realizes is empty, a really luxurious house, and befriends the ghost who lives there. And that ghost story I thought was really well done. Didn't bother me. I think my ghost allergy is gone. I mean, I still think it would bother me if it wasn't well done. The female Syrian ghost that lived there, I thought that was really well done. And then we just followed them. I'm not going to say any more about what happens in the plot, but we follow these 2 characters and get a sense of how enmeshed and tortuous and passionate their love affair and friendship was over the years. I would say one thing that I struggled with a bit, and this is a cultural difference, I think, not a failing of the book, and something that I could kind of naturalize for myself, was that in places, especially about romantic love, it had an overwrought quality. That's very culturally specific. So I did notice that, and I did flinch a little bit here and there, but just here and there. It was a profound portrait of what's going on in modern Syria, and masculinity and sexuality and feminism. All of those issues through the lives of these characters was really vivid and illuminating for me. The other thing that I would say was a little bit of a failing for this particular reader is that Hussam in Vancouver, he's struggling with a lot of the same kinds of issues that many gay men struggle with: sexual addiction, compulsion, other kinds of substance addiction, as he's trying to make a new life for himself in a new land and to explore the freedom that's available to him here. So part of that is inflected by being a refugee, but part of it is just an everyman gay experience that I found very relatable. I felt that some parts of that were a little bit over psychologized. In places, there was too much therapy speak for my liking, in the way that Hosein would talk to himself or the advice he would receive from others, and it just kind of made me cringe a bit. But again, that could be very specific to me. Very minor flaw. That's the only thing I would say that I didn't really like. And it deeply moved me by the end. I'm not going to say anything about the ending, but you need to experience the ending for yourself. And the audio was really good. I would suggest doing it as an audio text combo, but the audio is good enough that you could just do it on audio only. And I know a lot of you would never think to do an audio text combo, but I thought this was a really good audiobook and a very fine novel, and I'm looking forward to following Danny Ramadan's career. I enjoyed it very much. That's all I managed to finish, but I have been reading a whole bunch. The BookTube at War has started. I've started a whole bunch, and you're only going to hear about one of them because it's the only one I got far enough into to talk about under my new and improved, what am I calling it? Books I'm a good way into. Is that what I'm calling it? Something like that. Okay. So 3 of these are for Pride Month, which is now officially over, but who cares about that? It's every day and every month and every reading week is prideful for this particular booktuber. So I started this weeks ago. I'm now far enough into it that I'm 70 pages into it. This Canadian gay novel, The Family Way by Christopher DiRaddo. You will remember, possibly, that I read his debut novel, The Geography of Pluto, just a couple months ago. Loved it. There's a review I'll link in the show notes. And this is his second novel, which was published in 2021. The publisher, Vehicle Press, sent me both novels as review copies, for which I thank them. And I'm happy to report that 70 pages in, this is as good, if not maybe even better. Ultimately, it might even be a better novel, but it's certainly as good as his first one. This is about a gay couple. Paul is 40 and his boyfriend is 15, more than a dozen years younger. I forget how much younger. He's not like 16, but he's, maybe 25. And they've been together for a few years. Relationship is pretty solid. And lesbian friends of the older guy, Paul, at the very first chapter, second chapter maybe, proposition him to father their child, to provide his sperm so they can make a baby. And he was expecting them to eventually make that request. They don't want him to be a father. They'd like him to be kind of present in the kid's life as an uncle type figure, but not as a father. And he immediately agrees, and then his younger boyfriend is not going to be involved in it at all, other than a kind of uncle figure, possibly. And that's basically all that's happened, but the character development is really good. Christopher DiRaddo does such a good job at showing the emotional web of social and sexual experience that makes up so many, especially urban gay men's lives. I have a really vivid sense of, what makes these characters tick, and I relate to a lot of it. There's a sense of sustenance that I experience as a reader when I read Christopher DiRaddo. I think this is going to be a really moving book, and I'm glad that I've gotten that far into it after I think I started it early in June, and to continuing with it, at which point I'm hoping to have a Zoom chat with Christopher DiRaddo about his 2 novels. Another queer novel that's starting out really tenderly, and it's really just captured my heart already, is this queer Nigerian novel. And Then He Sang a Lullaby by Annie Kayode Somtochukwu. This is a pseudo-buddy read with Nemeka from Nigeria, and I think I'm going to try to finish it up in the next week or so that we can do that Zoom chat early in July. I have read 40 pages, 38, close enough, the first 3 chapters, and I am just smitten with the emotional content that is told in such a lovely literary way. The opening premise is that the main character, August, is born, and his mother, it was a risky pregnancy. The doctors advised her not to have another kid, but she had, I think, 3 girls and really wanted a son, so she had a son and then died in complications of childbirth, and that broke his father's heart, and that created a real distance between August and his father as he grew up. But he grew up under the protective love of his older sisters. All of that was told in a way that didn't ever descend into cliche, and I just felt really warm, lovey-dovey feelings about all these characters. It was really quite beautifully told. He goes to school, and as a preteen or young teenager, he develops a crush on a boy. And then in chapter 3, we meet this new character, Segun, and he also is gay, and I don't know if he's at the same school, but he is really bullied at school, and his mother loves him fiercely, and she goes to the school like 3 times a week to scream at the administration to say, you can't let this happen. You must stop it. But boy, that's such a thorny issue. And as somebody who was very severely bullied through my whole school life, I have thoughts about it. But what do you do about it? Because the more you complain as the parents, the more kind of ammunition you give the kids. But there's got to be, certainly this was a terrible situation. And in and amongst all that, this character, Segun, he gets into a relationship with a boy named Tanko, who he is really drawn to, but Tanko is maybe not the best boyfriend for him. He's really rough sexually and taking his virginity, and just I don't have a good feeling about that. So that's how it opens. I am just deeply impressed by the writing so far. The first 3 chapters, first 38 pages, and I'm eager to continue reading it. This feels like it's going to be something really special. This queer debut novel is also starting out good. This one's from India. One Small Voice by Santanu Bhattacharya. And this is for a Pseudo Buddy Read with Dan, formerly of the Weird Book Book Club. I'm about, I think, exactly 38 pages into this one too. And I'm really enjoying it. It's set in Lucknow, which is in Uttar Pradesh, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the childhood part of the story is set in 1992, which, if you've read much Indian fiction, was a very tumultuous year that many novels chronicle. That was where the mosque was destroyed by a bunch of Hindu activists, and it set off a wave of mass killings of Muslims and all throughout much of the country, and was just a really scary time. Our protagonist, Shubhankar, is from a Hindu family, but because they live so close to that city where the temple was desecrated and destroyed, they fear for their lives because of the violence that's just spreading like a wave and has come to their city, Lucknow, which is the capital of Uttar Pradesh. So that part of the story, and they want to hide it from their kids, kind of reminded me of Life is Beautiful. So they were trying to make out as if everything was fine for their kids. Shubhankar is 10 years old, but he picks up on stuff, and so that's what's going on in that earlier section of the story. And in the later section, Shubhankar is an adult. He is a bit lame. I'm not sure is lame politically correct anymore. He walks with a limp. There's been some mysterious injury that's befallen him that has not been explained, and some very shameful occurrence, which is probably related to him being gay, but that has not been spelled out yet. And those two things might be one event. How he injured himself, and the shaming trauma that he experienced. That may all be one event. Time will tell. But I think the writing is really good, and I'm enjoying getting to know the characters. The more present story is set in Mumbai. I've heard nothing but good things about this. I'm looking forward to my chat with Dan, but won't be maybe next month, August sometime. Got a lot left to read. And finally, this is the one book I've gotten far enough into on my booktube at War TBR to tell you about, to share my impressions of. And this is the Japanese novel, which I mistakenly said was by a female Japanese writer. I didn't look at the name closely enough. I thought it was like a Saiichi, which is definitely or almost always a female name, but this is Saiichi, which is definitely a man's name. So the author is Saiichi Maruya, and the title, it's a bare hardback from the library, is Grass for My Pillow, translated from the Japanese by Dennis Keane, and what a lovely translation this is. I am really engrossed in this. It was published in 1966, originally Sasamakura is the Japanese title, and the translation is 2002. And this is about a war resister. What a rare bird in World War II Japan. And he managed to be on the lam, to be on the run, avoiding military service throughout the whole war. And this novel opens with him 20 years later in the 1960s, and he is a busy, overworked, mid-level university administrator. And we don't have enough literary fiction that shows somebody at work, and this is masterfully shown. What he's having to do is so mundane. One of the things that he's busy with this day was that a professor emeritus had just died, and how much money should the university or the administration department send to his funeral? If you don't know, you might find it strange that in Japan people give money at funerals. It's a sign of sympathy. It's a gesture of support. And if you don't do it, you'd be, shunned. They also give a lot of money at weddings, and maybe a similar amount. So depending on how close you are, I never was at a Japanese funeral, so I haven't had first-hand experience. But yes, giving money in a really beautiful, ornate envelope and presenting it with both hands and all of that stuff is an integral part of Japanese culture. And so he is fussing about that, and they have to make a decision about what is the appropriate amount of money to give to a professor emeritus. How well loved was he? How well respected? How many publications did he have? And he's busy with that at the same time that he gets a postcard at work that's personal to say that a former lover of his has also died. And so then the two things are in parallel. How much money should he send to his ex-lover? And then we start to go into the past. We don't go very far back into the past until I read 56 pages of this. So, and that was the first chapter. And it wasn't until the end of the first chapter that we get a little bit of a glimpse of him during the war. And so this lover who has died was somebody he was on the run from the authorities with during the war. And they never did marry, but she was an important person, and he is now married to a much younger wife. This is really interesting. I don't know if we ever get Hamada, so that's his family name, Hamada. And that's how he's identified in the book. I don't like him. And I don't care. Sometimes if I don't like a character, and this could still happen, but I don't think it will, I often hear the opinion that just because the character is unlikable doesn't mean that you shouldn't read the book. And I would tend to disagree with that oftentimes, especially if I'm inside that character's head and I'm not enjoying being there. That's a very good reason for me to bail. And that's not what this is about. I'm enjoying being in his head. And I think he's a bit of a jerk. He's a bit of a jerk to his young wife. I think he was more than a bit of a jerk to the woman who has just died, his former ex. But it's so fascinatingly told that I don't care. He's a very well-rounded character, and I just am really enjoying it. The writing/translation is excellent. I've only had a bare taste of what experiences he endured running from the draft in Japan in the Second World War. I think it's going to be a harrowing story, and the fact that this traumatic experience has affected him in everything he's done since is already obvious, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the novel goes. I love that it's really chunky, 340 pages. I don't know, based on reading 56 pages, I don't know why this author is not more well known. He died in 2012 when I was living in Japan, but I'd never heard of him then, Saiichi Maruya. But his storytelling reminds me a bit of Oe Kenzaburo. I should say that the naming conventions in the West for Asian authors is changing. This was published in 2002, so they're giving his given name first and his family name second, which is how we do it in the West, Saiichi Maruya, but it's changing in the West. I'm noticing even like the New York Times and so on. So I probably should be referring to him with the Asian naming order, which is family name first and given name second, Maruya Saiichi. The depth of that first-person consciousness reminds me of Oe Kenzaburo and his novella. It's autobiographical. That's about the birth of his son. Here's the gif. I'm blanking on the name, but it's reminiscent of that. Grass for My Pillow. Don't know what the title means yet, but boy, this is starting out good. I'm really excited to keep reading it. All right. I have a ridiculous number of books on the go at the moment, and sue me. I'm having such a good time. So I'm going to start 4 more, because I have commitments to keep, people. I need to read this and get it back to the library. An Ideal Presence by Eduardo Berti, translated from the French by Daniel Levin Becker. I talked about it on my Friday Reads. I'm not going to... This video is going really long, so you can flip back to my last Friday Reads for what it's about. I'm going to start this New Zealand novel. I think this was put on my radar by my patron Paula, who's been on my Bite-Sized Book Chats a few times. The Imaginary Lives of James Pōneke. And I should say this is not just a New Zealand novel, this is an Indigenous novel. This is a Maori novel by a writer who lives in New Zealand, Tina Makereti. I'm going to be doing a book discussion on the fabulous book podcast that you should all be listening to, and I've been a guest on twice before, or once or twice before, the Bookcast Club. And I provided them, Sarah and Jess. Her name is Jess. I provided Sarah and Jess a short list of 5 books that I'd be interested, any one of which I'd be interested in having a discussion with them, and they chose this one. So we're going to be discussing this in July for an episode that will go up on the Bookcast Club podcast after that. This week I'm going to start another book for the BookTube at War, and that is the Anna Burns novel, No Bones. I think this is her debut. I love Milkman with all my heart, one of the best novels I've ever read. I'm not expecting this will be quite as good. Maybe it will be, but I'm sure looking forward to giving it a try. And finally, Katie, my patron and good friend, now that I've partied with her one night in Edmonton recently, Katie and I are going to start another buddy read. I bailed on the first 2. She said, "Are you sure you want to try another one? Are you sure?" I said, "Well, are you sure that you don't mind if I might bail on it?" But I hope I won't. This is a short story collection. No One Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July. This was on my Books I Must Read in 2023 or on haul video that I made in January, and it was a book that Katie had on her shelf, so we're going to start that buddy read this week. All right, that's my Friday reads. I had a lot to say. Thanks for sticking around for at least little bits here and there of it. Thanks for watching.